He talked about how the United States should not allow the Chinese to occupy those reclaimed islands in the South China Sea. And today, with General Mattis, who, when he talked about the biggest threats to the United States and the international community, listed China in that body of water.
But now the Chinese sending a bomber to go around the Spratly Islands, where they have the disputed area in the south, one of the disputed areas in the South China Seas, to do flyovers of artificial islands that they built. The United States now, as we listen to what is being discussed in these committee hearings, the confirmation hearings, they've got to be stopped.
Well, they've got to be stopped, and especially since in the middle of November, there's been increased activity by these H-6K nuclear-capable bombers of China flying around Taiwan, flying over the Spratlys in the South China Sea. We have China's sole aircraft carrier making provocative moves East China Sea, South China Sea, and the U.S. Navy is nowhere to be seen.
Fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. Here's the second part, which links up very nicely with that piece I just gave you. It's entitled, China is Steering the World Towards War. Interesting title. Satellite imagery shows China taking over the South China Sea, as it is with other trade routes globally. Both historically and biblically, prophecy show why it is extremely dangerous. Tensions are rising between China and America. No kidding. Ever since Xi Jinping, whatever his name is, took over as General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party of China. That's the point, ladies and gentlemen. Communist China. As Rush Limbaugh says, the Chi-Coms. His administration has been militarizing the South China Sea, and we do nothing. We do nothing. We should cut off trade with them altogether. We don't need them. And if any country is relying on the goods and services that they make to survive selling them to China, then look for other markets. Cut them out. If all of the Western world stopped trading with China, they'd be in trouble. If we didn't buy their goods or sell to them, they would be in trouble. They would be stuck in their own little bubble. We need to cut them off. And if it means having a war with them, well, we're going to have a war with these people sooner or later. Make no mistake about that, unfortunately. It's better to have it now while we've got the whip hand, isn't it? We can start with an economic war. His administration has been militarizing the South China Sea and working to push the United States out of East Asia. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. In two island chains, the Paracels, or whatever it is, Paracels, and the Spratly Islands. China is building a series of man-made islands 800 miles from the Chinese shore. These islands are being installed with anti-aircraft batteries, and fighter jets are being stationed on them. The Spratly Islands are claimed by the Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan and Vietnam. China is ignoring these nations' territorial claims. China is being aggressive and provocative. You see, this reminds me of Germany before the Second World War, where the West stood back. The Western countries stood back and allowed Germany to roll over parts of Europe. If we stand back and let them do what they're doing and don't challenge them, they'll become bolder and bolder and bolder. There comes a point where you have to stand up. The article continues. These militarized islands now function as forward bases for Beijing to challenge 7 decades of American naval dominance in the Pacific Rim. This should alarm the world. Yes, it should. But what are we doing? Zilch. Nada. Nothing. What we should do is remove them from the United Nations. From the Security Council. They should be removed. They're a threat to global peace. These militarized islands now function as forward bases for Beijing to challenge 7 decades of American naval dominance in the Pacific Rim. This should alarm the world. Yes, it should. Each year, $5.3 trillion of trade pass through the South China Sea. That is roughly 1/3 of the world's maritime commerce. Since Japan's defeat in World War II, America has protected the vital trade routes and brought peace to this world. Now the American military is retreating. Why? Well, have a guess. The Democrats, Obama, the Liberals, social policies, political correctness, and yes, of course, the inbred communists in the United States, attacking America from within. That's me speaking. And I'm right. I've always been right on this. America has so many communists embedded into the country now, under the guise of Islam. You think I'm joking? You look at the analogy and you tell me I'm not right. This is going to dramatically affect trade around the world, and the US trade especially. A trade war often precedes a shooting war. That is what happened just before World War II. What did I say? Especially so in Asia. Since before the Korean War, China has had a strategy to establish a security buffer extending far from its coast and engulfing the entire South China Sea. Its current military build-up in the Parcels and the Spratlys is bringing China closer to realizing its strategy. China wants a bathtub, unquote, says Mark Latangi, Senior Research Fellow at a Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. China wants waters, their waters, that they can operate military and police vessels in, without having to worry about the presence of the US, or the Philippines, or Vietnamese, or Indian naval forces, unquote. China is intimidating the nations of Southeast Asia into submission to its will. It is forcing these countries to do what it wants. Everything is headed into the direction of war, seizing sea gates. What is happening today is very much like what happened in Southeast Asia in the 1940s under Imperial Japan. Emperor Hirohito and Prime Minister Hideki Tojo tried to draw the nations of Southeast Asia into a greater Asia co-prosperity sphere so they could force Western influence out of Asia. Between 1930 and 1941, Japan established a shadow empire of economic alliances and intelligence networks across Southeast Asia. This shadow empire was to be the foundation of Tokyo's planned Greater Eastern Asian co-prosperity sphere. Japan's next move was the establishment of an actual Asian empire using military force. Once World War II started, the Japanese claimed the entire South China Sea and built military bases in some of the very same archipelagos China is militarizing today. A Japanese submarine base was on the Isle of Itu-Aba in the Spratly Islands and served as a staging base for the Japanese invasions of the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, and Malaya, now Malaysia. This base was instrumental in Japan's strategy to cut off Allied shipping in the region. The Allied victory over Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in World War II was greatly aided by the fact that they controlled the world's most strategic sea gates, like Panama, Gibraltar, and Singapore. In the decades since, however, China and the European Union have come to possess most of the world's sea gates. Time will prove that this is a deadly dangerous change. Before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the only thing standing between Japan and the complete domination of Southeast Asia was the United Kingdom. The British completed building a massive Sembawang naval base in Singapore in 1939. This base was meant to serve as a staging ground for the defense of India and the strategic Strait of Malacca in the event of a Japanese invasion. I think you can see where this piece is going. And I really don't think that a lot of people in the United States know what's going on here. We in the West, Canada particularly, because Canada has virtually nothing compared with the US, is funding its own demise. China has a 100-year plan. They don't look at things at 5 and 10 years. It's 100 years. They intend to dominate the world. They have a massive population and they have time to wait. But in the meantime, they're like a cancer. They're spreading slowly but surely across the globe. And we're enabling them. I cannot understand why we are so complicit. Why are we standing back and letting them do what they're doing? We have former prime ministers in Canada who are advising them on how to basically take over Canada economically. They're traitors in my mind. They're total traitors. But people think it's good business. It's not good business to trade with China. We should be doing no business with China. We should pull up the drawbridge and say, unless you back up, we're not trading with you anymore. You're not getting any stuff. And I want to say one thing, which has nothing to do with this at all. Perhaps you don't know this, but still the United States controls the internet. People say that the internet is just a hacker's delight. Well, it isn't a hacker's delight if you just put in one more bit of code. And people know this, and for some reason they won't do it. The internet is based on a series of numbers to give unique URLs, that's IDs to you and me. You can put another tier of code on top of that, which would stop all hacking, and they know it. And as far as the US military or any government organisation to be hacked, for a mere pittance of money that they spend on national defence in the United States every year, they could, if they wanted to, create a massive internal internet that didn't go outside of government auspices, that had no links to the outside. There is no need for governments, particularly American government in particular, to deal with the internet, thus eliminating any leaks, any form of communication with the outside world. It is easily creatable if you have the will. It would take less than 3 years to do, and there are people out there know it. And the internet itself could be made unhackable within a very short period of time. All that would happen is that your internet address would change very slightly, but even that could be made transparent so you wouldn't even know it's happened. But it would stop China in its tracks. It would stop these Far East countries attacking us in the West because they wouldn't get through that layer of protection. But for some reason, they don't want to do it. I wonder why. Finally, why does China need such high-tech weapons if, as they claim, they are a peaceful nation? Why do they need islands 800 miles from their shores if they are, as they claim, a peaceful nation? So if they are, as they claim, a peaceful nation, prove it and remove it and dismantle your military bases on those disputed islands. Why would you object to that if you are a peaceful nation? Someone, don't you think, should ask China that question in the same blunt manner? Because if they are not prepared to, as I described earlier, stand down, that only leaves one course of action. And that course is clear. Not just to me, but many others. You know what? It's so reminiscent to me, and history does have a tendency to repeat itself. It's so reminiscent to me of Neville Chamberlain, who was prepared to ignore the blindingly obvious so that a phony peace between Britain and Germany could still exist and be maintained. All the while, Germany was ramping up its military for war, and Britain was quietly rearming after the last conflict, that of World War I. However, the only difference this time, and it's a very big difference, that the free world, that time, had a knight in shining armour to come to the rescue, that being the United States. This time, however, is very different, because it's that night itself facing attack. And the outcome from this conflict, or any other, would be very different. Maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason President Trump wants to create a space force. If the US had a presence in space, any attack on the ground, however well organized, by the Chinese, or the Russians, or the North Koreans, or anyone else to that matter, could be swatted and contained and eliminated before it even started. Well, let's hope so. Because if we in the West don't have a defense for China's ongoing peaceful aggression, it will only embolden them to escalate any potential conflict to a military one, with disastrous consequences for all of us. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others, and you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.